Is an AI frenzy underway. Been trying to formulate my thoughts for months since this all started. You watch the marketplace, investors raising capital, investors prodding their companies, get into the AI world and prop up their stock prices. There's a lot of developers out there, some questionable. There are a lot of companies that are saying they can do AI, but I think that's no more than an accelerated spreadsheet.
The biggest question should always be asking, what problems am I solving? And can AI be part of the tool set and not, well, let's just have AI.
I want to take Anne and put her in front of a giant megaphone. And so just amplify that to all and sundry. I think that's the biggest thing, right?
We're going to prescribe that this is what you need to do. And if that's the case, how many merchants do we need? How many stores might we need? How many supply chains might we need? Thank you for joining me today. My name is Gary Newbury. I'm an award-winning strategic advisor and delivery executive. I'm focused on the rapid transformation of disrupted supply chain performance across the make, move, sell flow of consumer products and services from production to porch and assembly floor to shelf. My purpose is to inspire business leaders, particularly those within the consumer products and retailing space, to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win, one epic supply chain transformation at a time. There's additional content available from my website, RetailAID.ca, or on my YouTube channel, RetailAID. Be sure to check these out. As the business world faces significant volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, business leaders looking to drive market-leading performance need to be tapping into thought leaders, strategic advisors, and implementation executives who have mastery of operational turnarounds and strategic transformations, together with a strong track record of transitioning enterprises to become more agile, innovative, and digital. There's great material to get through here, so let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the RetailAID podcast channel. Today, we're going to be talking about AI. But before we get started, can I ask our great guests, George, Jeff, and Anne, just to give a quick 20-second intro to themselves before we get into the departure point. So, George?
Okay, so George Minikakis. I started a company called Inception Retail Group. After 20 some odd years of running retail chains, I decided to go off on my own, help private equity firms in identifying opportunities and whether or not they should invest in them.
I'm Jeff Roberts. I'm a strategy consultant, American, based in London. So work primarily with retail and consumer products companies.
And now I work in supply chain. I teach data analytics. I am currently working in some really exciting data projects that involve circular economy and sustainability. Happy to be here.
Thanks, everybody. So we're going to talk about AI today, and we're going to try and get beyond is it a business unicorn, or is it things that we're talking about, or is it something we can actually use in a business? There's currently considerable enthusiasm within the retail community around AI, and probably more so than, say, the metaverse when it broke cover. Some applications may include making insightful forecasting prescriptions, automating mundane tasks, or integrating diverse functions that can be joined together for greater visibility and management control. There are many challenges and risks for both large and smaller retailers who may see this differently as they approach the strategy of exploration and adoption. So let's think about the next 12 to 18 months ahead. What are the key factors more dominant retailers and their smaller competitors need to consider as they launch a major transformational program with a potential 85% plus chance of stalling or worse, failing? And if you want more details, go to the previous podcast where we explore the risks around technology implementations. Before launching into our discussion today, I thought I'd let Anne share some insights in advance of our discussion about what is AI and how, as retailers, as we prepare for adoption, some important pointers to consider. So Anne, over to you.
Okay, so let me just give you a very brief introduction to this whole concept, and all the terminologies are being thrown around so much. So AI stands for artificial intelligence, basically just the whole science is how to get machine to think and act as a human being. Then we have machine learning, which is a subset of AI, which is basically we collect a vast amount of data and then teach machine how to automatically learning. This is where you would hear terms such as supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforced learning. Then deep learning is another subset of machine learning, which is basically focusing on neural nets. And neural net is basically imitate how our brain works. And that's basically the major concept. Then we also hear things such as convolutional network, which talk about computer vision. We hear about LLM, which is being thrown around a lot right now, which is large language models, and we have robotics. So these are all related subjects that use pretty much sometimes overlapping technologies using data to generate the outcomes that they want. So computer vision basically focusing on how the eyes work and get the images and processing it, where natural language processing and then large language models basically dealing with text in all languages and how we get meanings out of it. Okay, another thing that I like to point out is that even though we're all very excited about AI and we've started Chat GPT and all these new technologies that seem to come out every day, this is not something completely new or something that business have never actually dealt with, because we've been working with data science or big data, data mining for a long time. And for all of these fields, we're actually using very similar techniques, and we're using also a large amount of data to generate insights. So this is not something that we've never heard of or never dealt with before. Like Gary mentioned, we have a lot of potentials and applications. But the reality of that is that we also have a lot of failure. For example, Gartner's estimate in 2023 alone, we're going to have about 85% of AI projects failing. Some of the major reasons for failing is that the lack of data or lack of quality data, or for example, we don't have the right expertise or cannot manage expectations or pick the right projects to deal with. These are some of the pillars of success, I would call, when a company want to jump in and implement AI strategy or even an AI projects. So there's a lot of factors or elements that one need to consider when implement a project instead of just the excitement or the hype of the moment. But I'd like to point out a couple of really important things is that the AI projects can be quite experimental, and therefore an organization should have a higher risk tolerance for this type of project and to understand the nature of the project that they're committing. Another thing, for example, is that it's need to be having the entire ecosystem in which you have the right kind of data, and the insight of the project may require change in the process, require training, require new business processes, and if the organization is willing or prepared to implement this change. And another really important point is to pick the right project to work with. So you want to pick a project that is making enough of the impact to generate excitement and generate support, but you do not want to pick a project, particularly for an organization that is too early in their AI or analytics maturity, too complicated a project that they cannot successfully implement that. So yeah, these are just a couple of the points that I think that we need to consider before we discuss about all the wonderful things that AI project can bring to an organization.
Okay, thanks ever so much, Anne. That was great. George, would like to respond to the departure point and also perhaps some of the things that Anne's touched on there.
I'm going to start with just saying there's an AI frenzy underway. Been trying to formulate my thoughts for months since this all started. You watch the marketplace, investors raising capital, investors prodding their companies, get into the AI world and prop up their stock prices. There's a lot of developers out there, some questionable. You know, there are a lot of companies that are saying they can do AI, but I think that's no more than an accelerated spreadsheet with somebody behind it, a human AI or human intelligence. You know, so there's a frenzy out there happening, but I break it down to two things that are going to take place. One is the human side, consumer, and the other one is the business side. And the consumer side of this, you know, in terms of what Anne is saying, you know, like we've got to pick the projects and we've got to make sure that you can do things. But I'm looking at this, how is this going to impact businesses? Unless the consumer is also impacted and influenced by this. It's going to be, in companies, to me, it's just going to be more about, continuing to engage your customers, continuing to use data. But once the consumer, though, and I really believe this is the pivot point for all of this, once you have applications that go to the consumer, let's keep it to retail basics, browsing. That is a dynamic shift. And what worries me for retailers, not necessarily the larger ones, but maybe a little bit for they're probably thinking about it. If I have an application that allows me to go on my mobile phone, which they're coming, to browse and segregate SEO and all digital advertising, so I can identify, and let's pick an oven. I want to buy an oven, and it correlates 4 or 5 brands. Here's the price, here's the benefits and features, and I can do all of this in seconds versus hours or days, right? It's a game changer. Now, how do the retailers respond to this, right? Because this application has circumvented all of them. There is no SEO, there is no advertising. What do? I think that the challenge is beyond what many of them have actually figured out so far. I think they probably are thinking about this, but so I'm going to add this other just for color. I really believe that consumers or humans believe they found another life form in AI. And all these searches that are happening out there, I've read articles on healthcare. They're using it for healthcare. They're using it for mental health issues, and Jeff, I know you're out in the UK, you're not in Canada. If you have a health issue, by the way, in Canada, and I mean mental health, try and get a psychologist. Your odds are 0. So what are they doing? They're turning to AI for advice. It's scary, but that is what's happening. And I think that frenzy is building towards how are you going to leverage consumers? And once the consumer starts using AI, even in its current state, that's going to challenge retailers to try and fight back. And I think that their challenge to fight back is going to be much harder than they think, right? You can do things internally, you can do things with your supply chain, but if you can't reach consumers, that becomes problematic. So I'll leave it there.
If I can respond to that, and you bring up a lot of good points. So for me, it's like things are not necessarily either or, right? For example, first in terms of users, obviously they're all excited about the concept of AI, but at the end of the day, what users care when it comes to a business, particularly in the case of retail, they're not asking the question, what AI does the company use? They just ask what features, what options, what services that you provide. And it is up to the business to leverage AI or analytics or whatever, even Excel sheet that they're currently using to deliver that value. So for me, what the business should be asking is not so much of what is the latest AI tools that I can implement, but more of what values that I can deliver to my consumers, my clients, and how do I do that using all the tools I have, including AI. For example, very good point of, say, Chat GPT right now, and it's not very far in the future that you can embed it into your recommendation system so that it would not just recommend a product, but it could really do calculation for you, make very detailed recommendations, scheduling product delivery, all that sort of stuff. But it only works if the business has the data that would be allow the AI to do that, or has the ability to deliver the product. So you could have the most wonderful chatbot that imitate human beings, that have conversation and give you all the details about your latest fashion and what would work, only to come to, and it is actual Canadian company, come to a fashion company that can only deliver your winter coat that you order in September, that you receive in April. That doesn't matter what kind of AI product or chatbot that you have. That means that the company should not, in that case, should not be asking, well, what kind of chatbot that I have, but more of how do I bring winter coats before winter? I think that is like, we have the users in, but when we have the business side that have a lot of other issues that need to be dealt with, and the biggest question should always be asking, what problems am I solving? And can AI be part of the tool set and not, well, let's just have AI.
I wanna take Anne and put her in front of a giant megaphone, and so just amplify that to all and sundry. I think that's the biggest thing, right? Fundamentally, Businesses have to be super clear on what problem they're trying to solve. And I think this is the thing with whatever technological solution comes through, is that there's always an assumption that somehow you can jump to end state, whatever that might look like. The best example I would think of in retail is when Amazon introduced Prime. Everybody suddenly was freaking out, and it was, my God, everybody, you got to compete on shipping. Suddenly, everybody was competing on shipping. Had to be free shipping, or nobody would buy from you. If you don't pay for shipping, my God, shipping, it's got to be free. And the main thing was that the question nobody asked was, actually, am I competing with Amazon? So is there something that I'm directly in competition with Amazon, and that is the singular deciding factor? So I think the fundamental problem that not only retailers, although it's particularly obvious in retail because the landscape's pretty heavily distorted with a few large online players and then a whole bunch of smaller players that are in other channels, that it's easier to see it play out. But the reality is that oftentimes we're not really clear on who we're actually competing with. And so I think when a solution tends to emerge, and I think artificial intelligence happens to be the solution du jour, that's come through. We've lived through earlier iterations of this with whatever it was. It was data. It was, you got to go online, beginning my career, whatever. So that whatever the solution is du jour that comes out, there's a rush headlong into, and this was George's point, I think it's right, which is a rush headlong into, how do we do something with this now? When in reality, what you need to do, and where I think Anne is absolutely 100% right, is that you need to back up a bit and say, what problem are we fundamentally trying to solve? What does our competitive landscape actually look like? And then what are we actually competing on? And will this improve that or not? There was a brilliant piece in Kellogg Insight. So they basically, Kellogg School at Northwestern and in Chicago, they publicize pieces that are coming out of the faculty. There was a really good piece published Sunday, which was about effectively how would AI land in the wider business world. And one of the big things that they point to is any transformation that comes through, any transformational tool that comes through is immediately captured if it's slightly better, or even if it's not slightly better, but if it provides a cost advantage over human labor. So, you think self-checkout tills, et cetera. We think about large language models use in chatbots, things along these lines, recommendation engines. It's not necessarily where you want it to be, but it shaves a little bit of cost off. So I think what happens is the consumer gets it whether they want it or not, because margins are thin anyway. And so it's an opportunity to do that, to take a little bit of cost out of the back. But that was a very long ramble to say, I think it's absolutely spot on. What problem are you trying to solve? And then figure out how this helps you solve it.
So Jeff, let me ask you this then. And Anne, I agree with both of you. The challenge, though, from the business side, having been on that other side, is the consumer. Trying to predict what the consumer is going to do is, I've had marketers tell me, George, if you got a crystal ball, great. It's not that easy. And what would be concerning to me today is not what we only can do internally, is just how the outside world is shifting. That's what I'd want to have a handle on, because when it comes to solving problems, that would be the one problem that I want to be ahead of. I believe companies are going to make mistakes in rushing off and solving the problems they think they should solve and completely miss what's being created outside beyond them, right? It's like social media. Who saw that coming? Who saw the digital marketing coming out of that? Not everyone. Very few did. Those who jumped in as early adopters are great. But now, this is really a very different game, particularly if the consumer has more control of handling it. But anyway, I'll turn it over to you.
Thinking out aloud, certainly hooking into your first few points. If we think about this sort of, let's call it two-dimensional world, that the history of where we've got here is that we have manufacturers, we have retailers, and we have consumers. We think about AI and what it's looking for. It's a quality of a product information. Where would the most accurate product information naturally reside? It would probably not be in the retailer. It may actually be in the manufacturer. So these models of D2C could actually be a major threat. We talked maybe 20 years ago about this, I might not get this right, intermediation, but we didn't have the apparatus for it. We just said that, send your order here, and we'll try and muddle our way through it. But now AI might direct that order to that manufacturer, bypassing the retailer. So it's not just about, what do we do instead of SEO? We can try and put our data up on the web, but also one of the things that AI might be doing on behalf of a consumer is not only looking at the product reviews across multiple retailers to see does this make sense to recommend it to the consumer, but also their delivery performance. So if you go and randomly look around Twitter or wherever else that this information may be, it could be that you're doing a great job in your supply chain, except your last bit, the last mile just fails miserably. And that's reported in fragments and social crumbs all over the internet. And AI can just scoop it all up and say, although the product information is brilliant, availability is high, but my goodness, if you want this delivered at home, don't go there. The reports from consumers experiencing their delivery proposition, it's terrible. I'm not saying that it is, but for instance. So I think that we're, instead of thinking necessarily just about what does a retailer now need to think about, it's actually what does this do for our industry? Because I think it could be quite significant in a way that people aren't actually thinking about this. And I have to thank you, George, for just making me think about that a bit more clearly.
George, I think you brought up a really good point of how do we anticipate what's happening next. And for example, the case of TikTok, who would have thought it would have taken off the way it did, or now it could not just only a way of, entertainment, and it could turn into easily a sales channel. And how many of the retailers out there are prepared to sell via a platform, right? So I think just like anything, it sort of go for a business, isn't that the whole point of having a strategy, a structure, an organization that allowed business to continuously monitor what is happening in the marketplace, what's happening with their consumers, and having the ability within their own organization to change if need, right? Because if we sit here and anticipate in a year or 2 years, what exactly would make consumer want to, the way in which you want to buy your products, interact, right? I mean, we mentioned Chat GPT, it could very easily and doable in the short period of time to plug into the entire system, to place order, make recommendation, look at what you have ordered before, what you have ordered, not only from this one brand, but other brands and all that to recommend, right? So the only way I think retailers can be prepared is to look within, and that's really important, to analyze their own organization, how prepared they are, with their level of maturity in all sense. Do they have data ready to go? Do they have centralized data warehouse? Or they'll be facing with the fact that they have no idea where the data could be aggregated in one place, right? So I think it is challenging, not only for retail sector, but for all business. But they can only prepare by go back to the fundamental. Do you have the right strategy? You have the right people. Do you understand your business? When was the last time you actually looked inside and analyze all the elements that you have that would make for a modern business strategy to have any chance of succeed, right?
My guess would be is that the big opportunities for things like improved analytics engines would be more in the connective tissue and, say, wider business ecologies. So, for example, you were talking about disintermediation, Gary, and I think recent, it might very well happen, but I think recent events out of alternative industries point to some interesting things that perhaps it isn't that strong, right? So we're seeing streaming peaked, and then we realized that actually there was a reason that cable companies bundled, because infrastructure is expensive, and it's sometimes easier to sell a thing through if you're getting a bunch of things. So the long tail of being in a cable package can be quite powerful or quite useful from a revenue perspective. I think about Nike's efforts to go D2C, their whole argument that they'd have 50% D2C by 2025, and now they're reinvigorating the wholesale environment. So where my guess would be, because again, it solves other problems, right? So the beauty of wholesale gives you access to fresh information. It helps you figure out, do better demand planning. It's risk mediation. There's a whole bunch of stuff that those things are quite valuable for doing. My guess would be that there's a big opportunity here at looking at the connective tissue and, say, wider retail ecosystems. So you rightfully point to supply chain bottlenecks and issues around that areas, but I think you can think around it is that, do you have decent information flows between primary manufacturers, wholesalers, and then onward to retailers? I mean, when in work that I've done in the past, that tends to be a bit of a breaking point at times, right? So things are set up, but then basic things like data quality, old protocols, et cetera, tend to stymie that a little bit. So I think where I see potentially huge opportunity would be more around augmentation or say layering into the existing things rather than necessarily wholesale transformation thereof. So I would think that if companies are starting to say, right, Nike's a great example. So if you take Nike, not only the wholesale argument, but their whole manufacturing structure, et cetera, is that it's kind of hard to figure out where the boundaries of Nike begin and where they end, right? So parts of it are outside of the business, but are done on contract. A lot of stuff's done inside the business. A lot of stuff's done in partnership with other people. And in thinking about, okay, right, if I have systems that are better at capturing all the information flows through that and then helping me make sense of it, it allows you to more accurately and effectively run what's becoming quite a complicated enterprise. And so I think in that respect, what I would see is that there's huge opportunities to probably help the company catch up with the way that it's organized itself. It's not just Nike, but I mean, and it's not new even. You know, it's been going on. Levi's was putting stuff across the borders into hand manufacturers in Mexico as early as the late 90s. So, you know, the idea is that connecting those bits that really don't define an organization the way it used to be, I think there's huge opportunity there because there's a lot of weird flows that go across those boundaries, and those boundaries aren't very well articulated. So that would be my guess is where we might see early opportunity for something like this.
I'm going to take it a little bit step further, and that's okay with everyone, but I see the marketplace now, and you know, it's been pretty stable, you know, up to COVID. Before COVID started, things were very competitive. You know, we still saw a lot of turnover in businesses, but now with AI and data analytics and the data science, things have changed dramatically, right? I look at it and say, you need to be real time in your ability to compete. And if you're not going to be successful at this. So I agree with you, Jeff, in terms of Nike being a great example of what it means to be competitive, right? They've got their fingers into everything. Not every retailer does. And that is the biggest hurdle for many of them going forward. They should talk to all of you, by the way, to get there. But at the end of the day, though, for me, as a retailer, I want to see a brand that is creating trends, not chasing them. I want to make sure that I got my pulse on the consumer. And I want to make sure that we are competitively fierce in the marketplace. That means translating that into, you better be able to compete in real time, because it's going to be, to quote a movie, the quick and the dead in this environment. And I really believe that that is the next threshold that we're heading into. You know, particularly if you think about the giants of retail out there, the Walmarts, the Targets, they've really got their, and Canadian Tire, for example, they're buttoned down. They know what they're doing. They've got it right. You know, all other players who don't risk a great deal if they don't get there. And if I was running one of those brands today, talent would be my challenge number one. Two is, what technology is this talent group is going to incorporate and identify, develop, and execute strategies. That would be where the priorities are. And boy, you better know the consumer better than I do. If your boss knows your consumer better than you do, you've got a lot of problems in-house.
George, I really like your piece about talent. And I think that is really interesting part is when a lot of the organizations, when they think about technological challenge, tend to think that if only we hire another new data scientist, or if only we hire another AI expert, or, you know, have another software will solve this problem. And I think that is a very key point, that they hire the wrong people. Need to hire the right people who understand, that be able to connect the technology capabilities and the understanding of the market and the consumers. And I think that is a really, really good point about having the right talent in the organization, which unfortunately is not always the case in a vast number of companies, right? And Jeff, I really like what you were talking about, treating this as an opportunity. I can see that this is a time where not only big companies, but a lot of small and medium retailers can just skip a number of the steps that you have to do and jump to the next so-called technologies or new selling platform, and approaching customers or doing things that they couldn't do before, right? So yes, it's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunities for many to explore what else that they could do.
I thought that AI would be revolutionary, not just evolutionary, not just building on what we will have and doing it just a bit quicker, because there are some statistics and reports, I think it's JP Morgan, saying there's going to be 300 million jobs disappearing as a result of companies successfully implementing AI technologies. But I think about this, that before we do anything, we have to check our organizational capabilities in terms of our flexibility to look at the world in different ways, both externally. What might our customers do? What is their direction of travel? Can we get, to George's point, can we get in front of that and educate them in a way? But more importantly, internally, what things are AI going to do for us, where we're going to end up not just taking out a few people, but taking out a whole tranche of people? If you're in say, the creative space, you should be very worried about AI because it can produce artwork, and produce literary works that it would take you maybe years to generate. It can do it in seconds. So if that's happening to the creative area, I wonder about like the basics of retailing and what we do in retailing in terms of product creation and assortment planning. These kind of things which are going to be responding directly to clues or cues from slight changes in consumers' behavior, which to a human we might go, oh, that we might explain this noise away with things, but the AI might actually look into that and go, oh, something's moving here. We're going to change that in our assortment. We're going to prescribe that this is what you need to do. And if that's the case, how many merchants do we need? How many stores might we need? How many supply chains might we need or not? So I think that the further that AI spreads its own capabilities, I think that we need to look inside our business and say, if AI is actually revolutionary, I accept it's a tool, but it's a catalyst for some substantial change in how we've been doing things. Have we got the maturity inside our top leadership team and our board, and maybe some support from investors to actually reorganize ourselves, not just moving the deck chairs on the Titanic, but actually fundamentally reshaping how we are internally and how we interact with our suppliers and our consumers and other partners? Are we at that point, or how soon can we get to that point if we're an individual retailer, big or small?
I'm slightly skeptical about claims of large-scale revolution, no matter what the claim comes from, right? So if we look at the history of work since the Industrial Revolution, is that everything that supposedly wiped things out didn't really wipe things out. It's like squeezing a balloon, the air goes somewhere else, right? So if you think about like all the wagon manufacturers, they just became part of the automobile supply chain, right? You used to make axles for wagons, you now make them for cars. You used to make shocks for wagons, you now make them car. Made wagon wheels, they now become, I don't know, some other component in the larger supply chain. Every claim of large-scale revolution tends to assume that the environment in which it's embedded is static. And so it just comes through like a scythe and takes out a large swath of the corn stalk stood there, and then your clear path ahead. What happens is that basically everybody's looking around and going, crap, my job's at risk. I'm just going to stand still and get run over. You know, it's like that scene from Austin Powers where the guy's driving the steamroller and he's coming at about 3 miles an hour and the character stands there screaming, right? And it cuts about 15 minutes for him to finally get run over. It's not really how it happens. You know, the reality is that it's a dynamic system. Everybody's watching everybody else. And so if the opportunity for a shift, it comes along, right? So you change one rule in one part of the game and it changes a rule in another. So they tend to move not necessarily in lockstep, but they're moving around one another. And so I think we just have to temper in terms of what we say this is possible or potentially capable of doing, because when I first started my consulting career a long, long time ago, when I was still in the Big Four, we used to joke that every project, the partner I worked for, every project was one project closer to his dream of running the zero headcount organization. We all laughed because I did org design. We all laughed because we knew that was fundamentally impossible, right? It always requires people to put around it. I think we just need to be super clear that, and honest with ourselves, to be quite frank, is that it can help solve a lot of problems. But I think what tends to happen is that I think about customer service as an example in retail, right? We can get a chatbot to do that, or, start with early recommendation engines. We can get early recommendation, we can drop it in there. We can preload it with our top 15 questions we get asked, and it'll spit out a link too. And I think I could never get my head around is it just seems like that's the one place I'd put people. Like, it's low cost headcount anyway. So why wouldn't you want somebody who's engaging with the customer, particularly at a point where they might be super irritated with your organization, to help solve the problem? And so I think what we need is a rethink. If we do want it to be truly revolutionary, then my suggestion would be we could probably look towards the top of the organization. And what David Graeber wrote a book about called Bullshit Jobs, right? How much of it, we're not writing memos anymore, but we're not far off, is that, how much of that if we're just writing emails to each other that we need a subsequent chatbot from Google to summarize for us to spit back out. That's the question I'd ask, not necessarily the guy making $9 an hour dealing with customer complaints. There's a lot of inertia in the system as it is for things to drive the way they're driving. It's a dynamic system, so when a change happens one place, it happens someplace else. I just think we need to be really clear on what the likelihood is. That was a bit of a rant and a guided tour of my random thoughts, but I think really what I just want to be clear is that we need to be careful about where we think we would potentially see this impacting things.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. I mean, this is exactly the case. I have seen organizations installing, for example, a new data warehouse and recording system only to increase the number of people because they need people to go around collecting the new data, and then they needed it to put into this new system. So yeah, absolutely right. And the way that so we need to make a distinction, I think, between what is the AI is capable of in an ideal situation, and then where we actually able to implement AI in a practical situation to a specific organization. So yeah, this is where looking within, really understand what the organization is about, what it can do, it cannot, which is always very difficult because it's involved the people at the very top acknowledging what they are not able to do, or not even having the ability to understand that, right? So yeah, absolutely. So we need to kind of make that the distinction so that we can, in a sense, manage expectation, right? Because we don't want to overhype what is possible, only to get completely disappointed. But then we don't want at the extreme, which is failing to understand what is approaching, what's possible.
I'm going to say it was Visual Capitalist, had a visual that showed the number of jobs, white collar jobs, that will be impacted by AI. And you know what the number was? 2. And up to 60% of their work would be impacted. Just 2 people. Right. So both your point, it's not, I've never believed that it was going to be the decimation of humanity and nobody's going to be working. Although it'd be great if we didn't have to work and the machines did, we just got a paycheck. That is not reality. I always thought that was the whole premise behind technology, but these billionaires have taught me something different. So anyway, that's another story. But Jeff, I love the fact that you got onto the customer experience piece, because you really riled me up on that one, because as you know, I'm sensitive to that one a great deal. Every time I pick something up and read about customer experience, somebody's got a tale to tell about how they're going to deliver a great customer experience. But no one is adding people to the equation. No one. And I keep stumbling over, okay, you've got 3,500 square feet of retail space and you've got 2 people. And if you really believe that me as a customer showing up at the cashiers and you say to me, have you found everything you were looking for today as a customer experience? You are sadly mistaken, right? Now, if you want to impress me though with AI and robotics, I'll tell you what. Talk to Elon Musk, see if he can give you a couple of his robots. And if they're well trained and you can put them in your store, then I'm really impressed. Really impressed. Because you've got a gimmick that's going to drive traffic. But as long as you're going to tell me that you got a ratio of 1 employee to 10 or 15 customers, it ain't happening. Not in this life. Not in this lifetime. Not in AI's lifetime. Nowhere. So that part, I just park. What I want to get onto is say the technology that we have today, we have to actually take a good hard look at it and say, to your points, what can it do? That is the real question. Consumers are going to have their own ideas. The media, as you know, has its completely different world than the one I'm living in, right? Everybody's going to be unemployed. It's the end of humanity, right? Elon and Zuckerberg are going to rule the world. And the rest of us are just going to be digging ditches somewhere or fighting for 1 cornstalk. I mean, it's really painting pictures that are grim, not reality, nor is it reality that everything is going to be, get to a certain level in a very short period of time. In the next 18 to 24 months, I think that's where Gary was kind of leading us to, in my view, is yes, AI will be implemented in many ways. And what's going to be practical? You know what? I'm old enough to remember the .com and what a bust that was. I am old enough to remember that one of those .coms raised, I think, $250 million. And within 6 months, it was gone. The money was gone. They rented space to have an office. The office equipment never moved in. They never knew what exactly it was they were doing. So that reverberates behind me a great deal about what is it that's happening today. And I think we're going to have a repeat of that in some ways. I think we pay attention to OpenAI, we pay attention to Microsoft, we pay attention to what Google is doing. There are going to be some very interesting implications that are going to lead to consumers making shifts and businesses having to make their own shift as well internally. But it only works internally as a retailer if you've got a value proposition and a brand that's relevant and that you're selling something that everybody wants. And that's the part that I don't think that the School of Retail has remembered. I think that there's a lot of technologists, no offense to any of them, that are in place, promising a lot of stuff. Sure, one transaction is great, but if you can bring me back that customer back 2, 3, 4, 5 times in a month, then I'm really impressed. But until then, I'm reserved. I'm excited about AI, but I'm not going to say that it's going to take over the world.
I would add this to your thoughts there. I think that if Carl had been here, we would have been perhaps talking more about the great acceleration. I think that a lot of it is attributed to the time of COVID. It kind of accelerated trends that are already there. But I think that AI will certainly accelerate further any trends that were being accelerated, to the extent that I think that many companies will effectively run at a brick wall quicker than they would have done if we were back in those sort of halcyon days prior to COVID, where nothing really much was going on, really. I'm enthusiastic about the idea of AI and what it could do as a tool and as almost a game changer. And it may help organizations to help their leadership teams to look at themselves and say, are you fit for the rest of the 2020s and 2030s with all the seismic challenges that are ahead of us? And can AI find its way in that, or do we have to look at the caliber of our leadership teams? So they're my final thoughts. Can I ask each one of you just to give our audience your final thoughts?
For me, in the next year or two, what I can see is that a lot of excitement and hype with AI. I would not see too much of practical applications and across all industries and across all organizations. What I can see is within probably each and every industry, there will be a few that are in the positions already to leverage AI and would probably make great progress and come up with ideas and practices that then pull the entire industry. So there will be many that are being put into positions where they feel that they're being forced to do something because their direct competitors are doing things in a different way. I think that is most likely what's happening. It would not be a case where everyone would have the same capabilities, the same resources to jump in and implement it, any change, not just AI, in the same way. And I absolutely agree with George and Jeff, is that we need to go back to the very fundamental concept of what the business is trying to do. What is it selling? What's the market that you're looking at? And approaching implementing AI from that point of view, as opposed to jumping on board that this is such a wonderful, cool, new, shiny toy that we all need.
I would echo much of what Anne said. Really, it's about augmentation more than I think it is about replacement. So I think fundamentally it's about understand what kind of business you're in, understand where there's opportunities to apply things that potentially having greater information around that might make things easier. And so one of my big recommendations would be look at interconnections with your outside environment, particularly if you're a retailer. I think everybody assumes that life takes place within the four walls of your business, when the reality is, particularly from retail, is that so much of it is outside what's going on, whether that's with consumers or customers rather, or whether it's with suppliers, wholesalers, whomever. I think understanding where those ties might be placed, I think there's a ripe for greater integration potentially.
I'm gonna end my thoughts with what I always tell people is dismiss nothing. I sincerely mean that. AI is not AGI, right? It's not at a level where it can do things on its own and be creative. It's not there. I think we need to remind everyone of what its current state is, although its current state is entertaining. And there is an entertainment value to this. And there is progress being made by a lot of good companies that are out there. That progress, will start to define how retailers respond as well. And I'm curious to see where OpenAI goes, where Google goes with this, what Amazon does on its side, even Walmart and Microsoft, and NVIDIA, not to leave them out. I mean, they're quite capable. So I want to see where they head and what the next evolutions are, because I really believe that the dynamic over the next 18 to 24 months will be in that static period where a lot of changes will be happening. And I think that the risk to retailers or any business is jumping in too early and not having the right iteration of AI working for you. That could be the biggest mistake people make.
Thanks, everybody, for those really great final thoughts, plus the rest of the conversation. For our regular viewers, stay tuned for more fascinating conversation with fascinating people. I'm sure that we'll be revisiting AI certainly over the next year or two as these things start to gain pace, and we'll be able to see, has it shifted things to the better or to the worse? Has it made industries much more competitive or less competitive? It might be left standing. Tune in for the next podcast, and thanks everybody for listening, watching, and just being there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening today. I hope the information has been valuable for you and your organization. You can connect with me via my website, RetailAID.ca, go to the contact page, or via LinkedIn and connect with me there. Please feel free to follow the experts on this podcast for more insights and to join in the conversation. I look forward to collaborating with you and playing an active part with your supply chain and business's transformation as you are inspired to think big, be bold, scale, adapt, and win.